The Far Cry series as of late has fallen into a pit of mediocrity. बिल्कुल बाकी Ubisoft franchises की तरह. Far Cry 2 and 3 are widely considered to be the best in the franchise, whereas Far Cry 2 is the single most immersive Ubisoft game जिसमें you have multiple healing animations relative to the source of damage. The head-up display of the game is super minimalistic with no annoying mini-map at the bottom. You have to physically pull out a map during driving or exploring to get your sense of direction. The guns in this game grow old, they jam, and eventually explode on extended use, forcing players to switch their weapons mid-fight. The shootouts in this game are also extremely intense, with the vegetation of your surroundings acting as a camouflage for the enemies. And when you can die in basically 3-4 shots at the highest difficulty level and have very limited healing options, you have to choose your fights carefully. Which means you cannot just go guns blazing in any area. लेकिन इन्हीं हार्डकोर फीचर्स के कारण द गेम वाज inaccessible to the more casual audience. Far Cry 3 ने इनमें से काफी फीचर्स को हटाया, like the malaria and guns jamming, and added more accessible features such as fast travel, stealth mechanics to one-shot enemies, and infinite healing in the form of bandages. These changes resulted in making Far Cry 3 the most successful game in the franchise, setting the layout for all the coming games. Fast forward to today और हमने recently Far Cry 6 खेला, and the best part about this game was its tie-up with the Stranger Things का upcoming season, which clearly proves that we were super underwhelmed by it. Not due to its gameplay, because it was already expected how bland it would be. This was a Ubisoft game and they hadn't changed the formula since Far Cry 3, which came out in 2012, 10 years ago. What we were actually disappointed with was the storytelling of the game. For us, the Far Cry games कभी भी gameplay के बारे में नहीं रही है. Gameplay wise, they have always been mundane with the classic Ubisoft tower climbing, outpost liberating, copy-paste side missions. What we really cared about in these games is the story and the characters, and this is a video comparing the storytelling of Far Cry 6 and Far Cry 3 and finding out कि क्यों Far Cry 3 works whereas 6 does not.
My true Yarans, I stand before you armed with truth.
Far Cry 6 starts off with a monologue from Anton Castillo, the main antagonist of the game, as he gives an expository dialogue talking about the country of Yara and how it has a cure for cancer, and Castillo is doing God's own work by bringing back slavery. Far Cry 3 starts off similarly with an expository sequence with a montage of Jason Brody and his friends spending their vacation on a remote island. It's the second scene jahan par the narrative of these two games completely differ. Far Cry 6 moves from Castillo's monologue to our protagonist Danny and her friends on the rooftops having a drink, and then we see, in our opinion, the biggest flaw in the storytelling of Far Cry 6 as compared to Far Cry 3.
They got my name wrong.
The camera switches from first person perspective to third person perspective. अब कुछ लोग सोच रहे होंगे कि इसमें इतनी बड़ी बात क्या है? In Far Cry 3, you don't leave the first person perspective of Jason Brody for even a single shot. Everything you do, every cutscene you see makes you feel like Jason. It's always up close and personal, creating the illusion that you are Jason Brody, rather than a third person watching Jason's story. Continuing the second scene in Far Cry 6, one of the two friends of Danny gets shot because he throws a bottle at a tank, which we are not sure कि उसने ऐसा क्यों किया or what did he think would happen, but anyway, there is no strong moment. As far as we know, these three people know each other since childhood, and one of them dies and the other two go. Coming back to the second season of Far Cry 3, you get introduced to Vaas, the main antagonist of the game, and the introduction of the protagonist to the antagonist in both these games are on the opposite sides of the spectrum. In Far Cry 3, you get introduced to Vaas when you're tied down in a cage with a brother. Your mouth is covered, so you can't even speak, and Vaas shows you a video of you and your friends doing a skydive on the Rook Islands just before the group was captured by him, reminding the player and Jason of how they've gone from having the infinite freedom of the sky to being locked up in a cage like an animal. The final scene of this intro sequence in both the games is the escape, and this too widely differs in both the games. In Far Cry 6, you escape normally like in any video game with tutorials coming in the format of prompts. You escape with Lita, one of your friends, and take the lead because Danny is trained. Compare this to Jason, who is scared out of his mind, and basically Grant, his older brother, has to carry him throughout the entire escape. Both these sequences end with the main villain killing both Lita and Grant, but then in Far Cry 6, it is simply shown in a cutscene in Far Cry 3.
No! Stay with me, Grant! Please, don't die.
You cannot even hear Vas in this because that is not important. All the focus of Jason and the player is on saving Grant, but eventually he dies and Jason is forced to run away, concluding the intro sequence of the game. In दोनों ही games के intros are very similar, starting off with an expository sequence, segueing into an escape, and concluding with the death of a loved one. But the difference that makes Far Cry 6 mediocre and Far Cry 3 excellent is the way of storytelling. Far Cry 3 is more claustrophobic, the protagonist is more scared and vulnerable, and the main villain is talking directly to the player, making the conflict more personal. Jabki in Far Cry 6, Castillo is talking to a group of people and thus lacks intensity. Even the voice acting of Far Cry 3 is much more intense than 6. Don't get us wrong, Giancarlo Esposito does a great job of portraying the calm yet terrifying villain, like in Michael Mando as Vas is just too good.
They say Vas! Vas! Who the f*** is it going to be? Them or me? Me or them?
सिर्फ इस एक सिंपल कंपैरिजन से it can be understood what a vast difference there is between the storytelling of these two games and to what depths has the Far Cry series fallen.